afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's session, Strengthening HBCU Innovation Ecosystems. My name is Terry Titwell. I'm Director of Inclusive Innovation and more recently, Institutional Transformation as well. Just a kind of quick thing, how many folks are familiar about VentureWell? Okay, good. Maybe 2 out of 3 is great. So we'll go through that so that way we can get a little bit of sense of what is VentureWell, why here, why now, and why supporting HBCU innovation ecosystems. Before I get there, just a little bit of background about myself personally, why this is mission work and why driven work. Used to be with John C. Smith, where I launched their Smith Tech Innovation Center, working within community partners and strengthening an ecosystem in Charlotte, North Carolina, and supporting that. And through that, kind of seeing like what the possibilities of like an emerging institution to becoming an ecosystem partner. So this would work for me. It's very personal. It's something I've been dedicated for the last 15 years, helping to bring in extra research funding to support this, and also catalyzing other different opportunities with the joint board with ORU and other folks. So this is just a little bit about why now, why here, and why this kind of session. So about VentureWell, this is kind of like, what is VentureWell? VentureWell is on a mission to cultivate a network and a pipeline of inventors, innovators, and organizations and entrepreneurs driven to solve some of the world's biggest challenges. We work with in higher education, government, incubators, philanthropy, and also with investors and networks. Some institutions were part of the frontier set, I can imagine, with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation a few years ago, and that was something which we are facilitating and ensuring that this was going across. For the past 27 years, VentureWell has really served and supported more than 10,000 innovators, training them, innovator teams, helping them develop their ideas to commercializing an impact, and supported some of those innovators and student teams with more than $10 million in investments and faculty with more than $13 million to transform institutional policy, structures, programs, and courses. Some of them are here today. Some of them have went on to get some of those additional faculty grants, and we're glad to see them. Some of them are in the multi-millions. That's another great thing we love to see, is like going from seed grant to idea to getting an NSF at the $5 million. That's great. Just in terms of ventures and things that we supported, how they've created more capital, but also jobs. So we're just not talking about STEM education. We're also talking about a national economy, national innovation economy, which is let's find ways to take ideas, take research, apply it, and build it into supporting the national innovation agenda. Some of our partners have been working with, again, the Lemon Foundation, NSF, and State Department, and NIH. These partners are just a part of the entire network of folks we work with and folks who funded specific areas of this work, both locally, nationally, and globally. This transcends all different kinds of boundaries, but also supports the idea of faculty being engaged, not just in their institution, but connecting to a much more larger network of institutions. So let's talk about some of the grants, and this will be very fast because I could imagine that you guys had so much information thrown at you today about funding opportunities, about where's the money, get the meat of money, let's get to the money. But this is something which is we love to do for all of those aspiring or emerging new administrators, faculty, or staff who are looking at innovation entrepreneurship on our campuses or looking to build this out. I used to be a grantee at VentureWell several years ago, and I got one of their early stage seed grants, $5,000. But then, the reward for doing good is the opportunity to do more. So this is kind of where I ended up at, is from a grantee to now a grantor in the organization. But this in terms of over the last 5 years, supporting more than 45,000 students and courses that have completed some of the programs and courses. Talking about impact. How do we scale impact around innovation entrepreneurship? Today, and it's something I think about, which is today we're seeing jobs being cut, jobs being recommissioned, folks really trying to figure out, when I graduate, what does the world look like? What kind of jobs are going to be open? And it really requires a different kind of learning and mindset. And something that in 2007 and 2008, that crisis created a lot of different folks really think about what kind of ideas, ventures, research, or things I want to do that may be transformational, that may not be directly a clear road, but this is something which is giving students the entrepreneurial mindset, giving them the entrepreneurial toolkit, so that way in times of crisis and chaos, they have the confidence to navigate it. And that's something that I've said as a faculty member, is giving them the tools and skills to navigate complexity and chaos with confidence. So supporting more than 600 faculty and PIs. So this is not just saying we're giving grants, this is also a network community such like this, which is, where do I find a community of practice? Where might we get additional resource and connect across, which is faculty to faculty connections across the states and also across the globe, who are working on some very fascinating opportunities at their institutions. And some of these institutional grants includes, again, for new courses and programs, enhancing and expanding existing courses and programs, and focus on science, technology, innovation, entrepreneurship. And it's probably like, well, how does this weave into my HBCU-UP grant or my CREST PI grant? It interweaves very closely, it could be, which is, we're seeing a need for a lot of postdocs and doctoral fellows become more entrepreneurial. In fact, we're seeing schools begin to adopt, well, I want my PhD students to file patents before they graduate versus publish, because this intellectual property needs to be also protected. How are we going to embed this into a new course? Is there a way to do this? Well, what about for our HBCU-UP students? Or what about, and a good friend of my colleague, Dr. Jackson here, who's been doing his work with Central, embedding entrepreneurial-minded learning into the HBCU-UP. And this is something which is beginning as an engagement tool, but also using as a launch pad to much more workforce development and more. So more than $13 million in date. And this is, again, I call it seed capital. NSF is a lot of rigor. We're much more less on that kind of rigor. And it's up to 3 years, and our fund rate is pretty high, between 25%, and sometimes up to $600,000 over a course of a year. Eligibility requirements are very easy. Faculty, staff at a university, U.S., and we don't have a membership fee anymore. We used to, but being part of the network as well. Again, supporting science and tech innovation, entrepreneurship, which can look very different in some institutions, but learning, project-based learning, or leveraging that, and supporting entrepreneurial ecosystem, which is, we're looking to create an innovation center on our campus. Or we may want to look at how we're going to take our innovation, our chemistry program, and turn into chemical innovation. One of our faculty members is doing some things with material science, like, I want my students to start thinking about material science and innovation entrepreneurship. Or I want to take some of my students who are thinking about engineering, mechanical engineering, and putting it more into a competition and prepare them for what does this mean for creating business plans in the real world. I mean, these are skills that are transferable regardless of discipline, which is, you're going to have to consistently use entrepreneurial thinking and entrepreneurial mindedness in this kind of sense. So and I say very short, proposal components are typically 6 pages. And I mean by 6 pages is like 250 words. We don't need to have a dissertation or give us broader impact intellectual merit. But we want to see that this is innovative and can be transformative in the scope of the work you're trying to do. And like I said, seeing some of our past grantees go from seed of these institutional grants to go and receive 5 million grants, it's just something which, for a junior faculty member, to have a community of support, a community of practice, and have a lot of different resources supporting them, this is very critical and supported, very critical with their growth and development. And actually, we have just launched a new cohort of faculty that now we're moving into fellows, where they have much additional support within the network. And like I said, not so many components: online, PI, collaborative resumes, letter support, and also verification of institutional support. And that's pretty much all that's needed to submit an institutional grant for our upcoming solicitation. Now, when we talk about strengthening innovation and entrepreneurial ecosystems, this is also something which is, many of you may be working with students who are doing research. How many of you are working with students doing research in some of your classes? How many of you are doing PI, CREST PI? How many of you are CREST PIs? Okay, great. So this is something that was created, which is, we want to begin to support students who may be doing some research, may come across some level of ideation, and help them receive the funding to build up their idea into a venture. When I say it's like some of those students you see coming out and creating their own ideas, creating their own businesses, what if there was funding available within the support classroom development or students who are in one of your programs to take some of their research and turn into a potential solution for a market, potential solution for what is needed for the economy. And we do that in various forms and shapes, which is up to $25,000. Don't worry, we don't give it all at once, and we want faculty to be involved because faculty are the mentors. Faculty are the enablers to support the students' venture creation and development, but we do not want faculty to be the drivers of it. We want students to have ownership of it. So we're saying, hey, listen, if you can say your class is focused on mechanical engineering, and some of the students come up with a very interesting design of a product or service that can be transformational, let's find a way to turn this into something that could be commercialized or become viable with creating jobs. And I say that because creating jobs is what we need now. We have a very interesting economic asynchronous dynamic going on, which is a good, healthy employment rate, but also a lot of companies laying off. But because there's a push for new growth enterprise. We've never seen so much of a push and so many new companies being started because there's an opportunity in chaos. But we want to be able to offer that up to all the students. And I say this because one of my students that I hosted within our innovation center, last year she raised $1.5 million as a recent graduate. So we're talking about creating jobs in terms of just getting a job. It's something which is very instrumental to think about for many of our students. And she went through this program as well. And I say that because it's very important to think about how am I going to support my students, how am I going to support the ecosystem, and how can the ecosystem lean in. We're seeing that the economic growth and prosperity is really linked to stickiness of institutions. It accelerates. Folks who are looking to invest into HBCUs, MSIs, who are really looking to accelerate ideas with the new Science and Chips Act, which we'll talk about later, how that is going to lean in and how you can lean into some of those efforts as well. But this is up to, again, $25,000 for students to take some ideas, research, and turn them into something that could be potentially discoverable. And some of this funding could be used to do market discovery, which is, hey, we need to go to Paris to find out exactly how the supply chain works in order for us to see if this could be done economically, if it's economically feasible. Or we need to understand what's the patenting process and how much will it take for us to take our mechanical engineering design and turn it into a patent search process. We may need $10,000 to do that. And this is kind of that kind of funding that's available to support that and what students can use it for. And then moving down, which is we provide an investment of up to $50,000 once they get past these phases. And that's really could be transformational for supporting not just the institution, but also supporting the students and also supporting depends upon your intellectual property policies, supporting your overall endowment, and of course, the college down the road. So let's talk about institutional transformation and ecosystem development. As I mentioned, this is where the rubber hits the road. Where to lean in and where to dive in. So with this, we've seen the transformation with so much over the last 3 years in policy, in the narrative, supporting HBCUs, supporting MSIs. What's the policy landscape? What has been driving this shift to ensuring that HBCUs and MSIs are going to be engines of innovation? Because this is critical for our overall national innovation economy. And this is really towards where we're looking at tech-based economic development, but also the advancing racial equity executive order, how that shifted all the federal agencies to begin to embed what they're now calling it inclusive innovation into all federal programs and policies. And how does this play out as we see the new $60 billion plus NBDA infrastructure bills, and also with the Digital Equity Act, which is also going to institutions and going to institutions and also going to universities to help figure out exactly, let's double down on some learning. But also let's turn the learning into economic development and growth, which is a byproduct of some of this work. And let's establish innovation entrepreneurship hubs on these campuses across not just HBCUs, but also MSIs. let's now see that we're seeing policy shape up with the new $260 billion Science and Chips Act, that still a lot of funding has not been released. How many of you have heard of the regional innovation engines? I'm sure you have seen it. But also there's the regional technology hubs, $1 billion. All these new funding mechanisms are getting ready to be deployed. The question is institutionally ready for the actual process and projects to transform not just the institution, but also to transform the surrounding community. So if you see many of the institutions, I wish I could pull up the map now, many of the institutions that are MSI or HBC are in some of the southern states, which is where there's not a lot of dearth of economic vibrancy in terms of capital, investment capital being deployed. And this looks to transform that by having one of the biggest investments into the Southeast. In fact, the USPTO will be opening up a new patent office. It's somewhere in the Southeast that many states are going to be looking to have in their state. So not sure who's going to get it, but this will be transformational for many of the institutions that are located in the Southeast. So what does it mean to be a part of an ecosystem, and how does the university play in this? The university has a unique role, supporting institutions, supporting government, supporting corporations, and also facilitating talent with the entrepreneurs. Universities have significant infrastructure in place. Many of you know because you're managing $5 million of NSF money or more, which is financial systems, financial tools, financial capacity to manage a lot of this funding that can be used as catalysts for early stage development of research, basic research to applied research. But now we're seeing the spill-off effects, which is being able to attract industry partnerships, such as your industry university research centers, which forms this kind of spin-off effect, which we're seeing now play out with a new directorate of TIP, Translation, Impact, and Partnerships, Innovation and Partnerships. And this is something which is moving the economy forward. We need to see a return on investment for taxpayers' investments, which is something that has been moving forward, which is we need to see more of return on investment to taxpayers in the form of jobs or new jobs, new companies being created. But also, how do we begin to look at research with early stage funding, commercializing, and supporting new entrepreneurs? And not just supporting new entrepreneurs, but supporting entrepreneurs of color as well. The racial wealth gap is as high as it's ever been, and we're seeing it consistently play out because of the lack of innovation-based enterprises by people of color, or by the wealth created from these innovations that have transformed economies. So this is something that's very critical to, one, a research perspective, but also two, we do not have enough research on the intersection of people of color and innovation-based enterprises. If you type up, STEM-based innovation and people of color, we would not see that. So there's literature missing from this dialogue, and we need to have more of it. So this is where universities play a significant role and can play a significant role in some of this. So as Dr. Carlita mentioned today, the Directorate of Social Behavioral Economics, these are some of the questions, which is how does STEM play a role in creating more minority innovators and entrepreneurs that could create wealth or reduce the racial wealth gap? That is a question that has yet to be studied so much, but it's in the thought process. So this is just kind of like the intersectionality of the university within creating and supporting it in a very enhanced innovation ecosystem. And some of these things, which is the economics of the innovation and the history of it. Not all economic systems have worked or benefited institutions. As I like to say, there was a very interesting effort happening back in the 60s where, much of the economic growth and development infrastructure did not support innovation, did not support many of the HBCUs, which we're seeing play out in, some of the state policies with supporting land grant institutions and recovering some of that investment. So there's a little bit of history and a justice that needs to be created to support the transformation of these institutions, but also the region. Because MSIs and HBCUs are typically in areas that there is a need for economic anchor, and that institution is an economic anchor, and the more attractive it is for bringing in additional federal dollars and supporting the economy, the spillover effects will have a transformational impact. So we need to ensure that these institutions are healthy, vibrant, and also interconnected to the overall ecosystem. So how do we begin to look at what are the federal mechanisms for leveraging to support this? We know that HBCUs bring over $14 billion of economic impact. So that means for every dollar invested, that could create up to $3 or $5 in that community in terms of return on investment, new tax revenue, new jobs, et cetera. So we need to begin to look at ways of leveraging these investments to support and use them as catalysts for spending and enhancing that innovation economy in those regions. For instance, the EDA, which many folks, how many of you are familiar with EDA? All right, well, hopefully you'll see them tomorrow, which had over $1.5 billion. Many, very few institutions applied to use that funding. I think maybe one or two HBCUs got funding, which was up to $5 million, to build a new innovation facility that was going to support the university, the students, research, and also the community. And this was a sense of how to use catalytic funding to build it into the infrastructure. I know faculty are always saying, I need more research labs. I need more space. I need more of this. Leveraging the federal funding, leveraging the federal funding ecosystem to support this kind of what I call the capital stack, which is using some of this to support this. Just a few weeks ago, when I was at the institution, we received, the proposal I submitted received $5.7 million for the institution, which was one, to embed infrastructure and community into it. So there's a kind of a spillover effect. The National Innovation, NSF Regional Innovation Engines, they already hit the first wave, but looking at how the universities, HBCUs show up, I think some may have participated in this, $160 million investment into regional innovation engines that should become sustainable. How are institutions prepared for the engagement? Not a faculty member, the institution, because we don't want to have one-offs, we want to have capacity built into it. And the newest thing is regional technology hubs, which is still in development, but it's coming down soon with the new Consolidated Act that just passed, a new budget. And the MBDA, which is actually a new project that's going on. HBCUs, MSIs are necessary for all of these things. And institutions that need to apply and be more engaged in this process. So the question is always, who's involved, who's engaged, and to what extent, and how do we consistently move this forward? I had a chance to share this with some of the folks, may have got my email. They need to apply for the NSF EPIC, which is the Enhancing Innovation Capacity, and that's really the beginning stages for bringing a team together to begin to look at how do we leverage this regional innovation engines work to begin to look at sustainability and shifting the institution and in a way that's going to be an economic development engine and not just for basic research, but we want to begin to see commercial gains. We want to see economic gains in the next 10 years. How is this going to be impactful? And this is where I encourage you, if you're not a part of the conversation, it's 4 pages, and the NSF rarely has any application or solicitation that's less than 20. So check it out, and I really would love to see that. So with that, I'll pause and begin to use this for any questions, comments before maybe turn it over to you for more of an exchange.
Can you talk about this other HBCUs and how they have it set up? Is it at Morehouse? It's kind of led in the business program.
Mm-hmm.
So is that how are other schools have it set up? Are there usually anything that's in the STEM departments? Is anything in computing?
Yeah.
What do those look like at other places? Question for the audience.
Okay. So the question is that should these units be set up in a business department or
how are they set up in other?
How are they set up in other institutions? Great question. Normally they're set up inside of the areas of STEM. So for me, I was the director of STEM innovation, which means I was in the College of STEM. We have an Engineering Innovation Leadership Council, which we manage with NSF. It's within the Dean of Engineering office or where the Dean of Engineering Research is normally within the engineering. because we're needing to see this more play out. And normally, where does innovation and entrepreneurship live? It lives everywhere. It should live everywhere, right? Because we've had those dynamics. Because there's a little bit of difference between invention-based enterprises and innovation, and more of business entrepreneurship that may look different. You know, we're talking about deep engineering sector, science and tech that goes through patenting that may need business later. So there's a little bit of setting this up, and and folks who are really interested in this community is like folks who've been struggling and doing this work for the last 20 years, which is STEM, science, engineering deans are creating new positions. A vice dean of innovation within the College of Engineering. So this is what we're seeing, and which is where should this position and where should this work live, and what are the competencies that we need to begin to create a job description to create this work to be sure we can attract, develop, and also incentivize what is a faculty member. So I hope that answers, which is it does need to belong inside of some area of STEM discipline. Sorry, question.
Thank you for your information. I'm thinking what the difference from this program with SBIR, STTR program. Not only that, I was listening. You were mentioning the innovation starts from the class. Student help student to start their business. So who is going to be the PI like that?
So that's why the faculty members have to be engaged, because the faculty are typically the PI. So like imagine doing an SBIR for a student. The faculty is the PI. The students are the entrepreneurs until they actually create a business that is like, this is now a enterprise that's now listed, that's independent of the university. So the faculty is still the PI, but the faculty it's not the faculty's business. We want the faculty to be responsible and supporting, and actually preparing. We actually give faculty grants to accommodate for their time as being a PI for the innovation that the students are developing and creating.
But the idea comes from the faculty. The student helps the faculty to enterprise that idea.
So there's a difference between the students. So imagine there's two. So one the faculty are creating this invention or innovation, and the other one is the students are developing an innovation, and the faculty is serving as PI to ensure that students are meeting their goals and objectives. Then there's the other area, which is the lab to market, which is the students are supporting the faculty, and they're playing a more of a support role to move it forward, with the faculty is playing a support role on this side. So this E-Teams is more so for the faculty to support the students within that. But in terms of if it's a postdoc, and there may be some wiggle room here, which depends on, again, a lot of intellectual property policies of the institution and the working agreements, but sometimes it really can support how it's being led, but that's an offline conversation, okay? And there's a question back here, and I know I got you next.
My second question you didn't answer. What's the difference between this program with SBIR, STTR?
Great question. So SBIR, STTR is managed by SBA. We're independent of SBA and also independent of NSF. This is completely funding that we provide. So the E-Teams is funding we provide. However, it is a great way because it's setting up for the process to do an SBIR or STTR down the road, or even a PFI down the road, which I think, or I-Course. So this is really for students, it kind of gives them a early stage introduction to going through that gauntlet. Yes?
Is this EPIC program for a year at 400K, the last one, NSF enhanced, is it for a year, 1 year, or multi-year?
It'll be probably between 1 year or between 6 months up to, I think, 1 year. And this is really, the way it's written is really to enhance capacity, which is not defined what that may look like. Because what we're saying is that there needs to be an additional person, like what is the Vice Dean of Innovation within the College of Engineering? We need to build a capacity role for that to be able to augment some of the responsibilities and support some of the faculty's initiatives. We don't know what that may look like. So it really is a seed grant for preparing for meaningful engagement within the regional innovation engines.
So for a year, for 26.
Up to a year. And it's really, the first phase is 4 pages, but it's 400,000 could be used in a very capacity development way. And I don't know exactly all the specifics of what that may look like, but it's going to be very institutional driven.
You mentioned postdocs. Postdocs kind of students for meetings.
If there are still, good question.
Please repeat the question.
Oh, so say that one more time. Does postdocs included in
Counted as students for the E-teams.
can postdocs still be included within the E-teams? Great question. It depends on some of the work that they're doing in their postdoc, and I think that's an offline conversation which we haven't specified to what extent is the postdoc involved in the process. If they're still doing some other work that may be considered still relatable to it being a student. Well, there is students who are completing their doctorate, ABD, who are in that process. They do it before they're complete. There may be some more wiggle room there, but something like that is definitely an offline situation. Yep. Any questions online? Okay. Yes, question about.
These funding amounts you're showing, are they set aside for HBCUs or are they competitive?
They're not set aside for HBCUs. And the reason why I was sharing like the process of this, they're not set asides. What gets measured gets managed. Because of where the policy landscape has shifted, it is now requiring a specific performance management process, engagement. So it's not set aside, but it's definitely in the inclusive innovation framework we're seeing play out from advancing equity, that they also have to submit an annual report to Congress on the progress that has not been done previously. In the first year, I think is coming up is this actual Congress. So there is a desire within that report for it to be submitted to Congress. There is a desire from each agency to ensure that HBCUs and MSIs are uniquely represented in the allocation of the funding. And we're seeing it play out in some of the experiments, for instance, with the NTIA Community Technology Fund. 40% of the fund was set aside for HBCUs versus just MSIs. It was set aside. But they're beginning to see this play out, which is now all federal agencies are using the minority serving institution classification that has been developed by the Office of Civil Rights from the Department of Education. So there is going to be more of that playing out into policy solicitations and so forth, that every agency may be adopting that for a way of having set-asides using that framework. Yes?
It sounds to me this program is something to try to develop a curriculum or core curriculum activities. So let's say I have a grant
Mm-hmm.
and already provided some kind of budget
Mm-hmm.
to do some type of activities. Can I use that as can I ask some money from you with those activities to further develop those work?
Can you use our funding to supplement some of the work you're already doing?
Exactly.
There's no restriction on that. I don't think we're looking to see how you're leveraging that, and is there a way to leverage it? And that's something that's actually in there, which is all this funding all you need? We know this is just a small part, so there may be a way of saying, is there a way of leveraging? And then your project may cost $150,000. What other funding mechanisms can we help you get access to that can build upon the scale up? Yes. So yeah, that's why I said we love to see our grantees go through the ideation and go to submitting something that's more robust. But this is just some of the federal funding landscape. More work to be done here, but I think it's critical that as faculty within HBCUs or MSIs, to really begin to look at some of the work that can be used to, attract additional capital, ensure there's an innovation center on every campus. In fact, in the Science and Chips Act, there's a significant amount of funding being allocated to support innovation centers on MSI campuses. And that is a very, I read through the entire thing twice, but there's a lot of funding to go support where should this live, an innovation center within the College of STEM or engineering, supporting this kind of invention and enterprise-based work. So now that you all have asked me questions, I'm going to ask you some questions, or you can share them, which is, what are some strategies that you're building I&E on your campuses or helping to build innovation entrepreneurship? Is there a course inside of your STEM disciplines that you're using, minus Dr. Jackson, in developing this? So I'd love to understand some strategies, or is there a desire to create some of these strategies? It seemed to you, my colleague in the front, that you were kind of indicating there may be an early idea. Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, I had a grant from NASA,
Mhm.
basically to try to do some work, try to diversify the
Mhm.
supply chain and those. The NASA officer keeps pushing that how can you commercialize your idea, and different type of those also help students to start their business.
Mhm.
Last year I submitted a SBIR challenge to defense.
Mm-hmm.
The result was not good. I may try it again.
Yeah.
But from during the process, I found out that you do the engineering research,
Mm-hmm.
and then you try to scale that up to something like a business. A lot of things you got to learn.
Yeah, and this is where we come into play, particularly VentureWell, with a lot of that lab to market work is helping them get past those hurdles. And that's something in terms of all the getting an SBIR or going to a PFI or going through a SCTR and then getting to the investment vehicle. That is a huge process, but it requires a lot of resources, momentum, and also expertise being shared and leveraged.
We have good news to share.
Uh-oh. I love when someone says good news.
I'm from Fisk University.
Oh,
Nashville,
I'm
Tennessee.
going there tomorrow.
Oh, welcome. So, two good news. First is we got the private foundation, and that helped us in having a established chair in entrepreneurship. So we have a new faculty whose role is to infuse entrepreneurship on campus across the curriculum. Second thing is that our colleagues, our institutional advancement work with our city in Nashville, and city funded us $10 million to build entrepreneurship center. And we're looking forward to it. We have the building, then we can get the funding to run all these programs.
I'm going to Nashville tomorrow because they're launching the Mid-South Innovation Hub, which is, going to be a wonderful thing, which is really inclusive innovation at its core. But those are the things which is enhancing public-private partnerships like that. We support kind of this kind of innovation entrepreneurship, and there's going to be more institutions are actually financing those kind of positions. Truist gave us $3 million to do that. So a lot of banks, a lot of folks are looking to invest in what is the new role of higher education, and how does that play out with supporting the future of work. And that's going to be really which, supporting students creating inventions and enterprises and building that up, and supporting faculty and giving faculty incentives to ensure that if they were to create inventions and so forth and spin outs, they're also meeting the promotion and tenure requirements, because that is also something that is critical. Yes?
Do you all know of institutions that's doing anything at the high school level?
All of them. So the question is that which institutions are doing work at the high school level in PK or K-12, I imagine. Many of the institutions are doing work with outreach, and in fact, many of these kinds of resources are great ways of what we call a triple effect. You know, faculty to student to community, which has had a tremendous impact. We're leveraging, you know, EDA funding or leveraging Department of Commerce funding, which is we'll use this to train our students to prepare them to go out and support the community with training in entrepreneurship or training in engineering, or even training with technology. These are ways of pulling down, connecting with the community. So there's a level with that. When I was at Smith, we were every year getting 80,000 plus from Best Buy as part of their invention hub or some innovation. And they were also always finding ways to connect more with HBCUs and more MSIs, which is how do we begin to create creators at the early stage from between grade 6 to grades 8. There's also funding that's being allocated with the SMASH program, which is at some institutions, which is supporting after-school, out-of-school learning. I didn't put this up there, but there's the minority MECIP program with the Department of Education. How many of you are familiar with that funding? Okay, I received 2 awards with it. Minority Science and Engineering Improvement Program. That can be used in any way, shape, or form to support institutional capacity. In fact, they love when you put in where we're going to be working to support high school students as a part of this program. That is a very, you know, robust funding mechanism and does not take a lot out of institutional indirect costs because it's going to support participants. So those are another mechanism to support that kind of outreach and engagement that you may also want to think about navigating within your college or institution.
Can you say that name again?
The MECIP program, Department of Education. It stands for the Minority Science and Engineering Improvement Program. It comes out, opens every 2 years, so that means you have until May to begin to draft up a solicitation. It normally is only open for about 60 days, and that means everybody is home over the summer, probably having a good vacation, and it only opens up for about 60 days. So every 2 years. So just think of that, every 2 years. It opens up for like 2 months over the summer. But it's a great funding mechanism for, again, like I said, moving from a seed grant of 30, 60 to going to MECIP maybe 750 to going to NSF, which may be 5 million. Whew, all right. I think I have more questions than you guys have. What might prevent HBCUs, and it's something which came about in some of our conversations with some of the other institutions, which is what are some things that may prevent HBCUs from securing or implementing grants related to entrepreneurship and innovation? One of them was we don't have a person responsible for this work. Infrastructure. What do you mean by infrastructure?
Research. The school doesn't know what type of policy it should follow. When you get into that, they just tell you, you cannot do this, you cannot do this.
Mm-hmm. So policy infrastructure. Great. Any other things? How many of you all have vice presidents of research and innovation, or vice presidents of innovation? Used to?
I know at Morehouse, I think it might be the same in a lot of places, but if you're in computing and you don't have anything to patent, it's hard to, sometimes the rules at the school, like the school will get so much of a cut, it's almost like it's not even worth trying to do it, right? Which makes more sense if the school had to put front money to get patents and stuff done, but if you're in tech and the school doesn't really need to front any money, it's kind of...
Let me ask this question, because I know exactly what you mean. How many of your institutions have an enabling policy for innovation and entrepreneurship?
What does that mean?
Enabling means that it is not punitive to the inventor or to the innovator to develop something.
Okay.
Because punitive means that the university is like, we will give you the option for rights back after you disclose the invention. Some institutions can afford to have an innovation policy or intellectual property policy because it costs too much to implement it. So that's why they'll just have one that's punitive versus having one that's feasible.
You talking jargon, I don't know.
So let's say for us to manage intellectual property, it's going to cost us $10 million a year to operate and manage intellectual property for every invention being disclosed. So that means we have to now put up lawyer fees, search process, XYZ funding mechanisms. It's better for us to have something where folks don't have to worry about, enabling or creating inventions for us to manage. It's better for them to do it all. So we'll just have a policy that's not enabling, which means we don't want people to invent. We want them to do something else, but we have to have a policy in place because it's an institutional requirement.
So it's a policy, to not have a policy?
It's a policy to ensure that you do not disclose inventions to the institution.
Oh, so don't tell them.
No, it's a. So let's say there's inventions like, okay, the university will say, well, we have this invention policy, this intellectual property policy, but it's so stringent that faculty and other students may just say, this is not worth my time to disclose it to the university because the university may take a cut. It's a very legal process and problematic, which is some institutions have just said, we're just going to create a policy that's a little bit more enabling for our faculty and students and create the environment for innovation and entrepreneurship, which is we will not try to own the intellectual property unless there is an investment from the university.
Is that something that VentureWell can help with?
Yes, we'll work with institutions on crafting intellectual property policies that are enabling. Because if you're thinking about creating a culture, you got to think about what is the operating environment. Students are afraid that the university is going to own their intellectual property. So if they're afraid, then why would they even begin to create?
I agree.
If the university says we own everything, then why would, so there's a need to have an enabling intellectual property policy, and this is one of the things I worked on before I left, which is we need to ensure that the students and the community understands intellectual property and policy behind it. Because when the institution says we own it, that means students feel that what I have put my time, sweat, and faculty may seem the same way. I put my time, sweat, and you own it. That means we need to have a conversation to ensure everyone's on the same page and make sure we have an enabling policy, not one that is punitive. And sometimes that requires leadership to understand what's the difference between a policy that's enabling and a policy that's punitive. As I brought to one of my colleagues at lunch today, it's like, would you rather have a wealthy alum or an alum very pissed off that's wealthy? Exactly, right?
Makes it to me.
I know. Most of the times that they're in many of the institutions that may have intellectual property policies are created by some lawyers that have done this for R1s that have a higher propensity for that. And even some R1s actually have a policy where students and undergraduates do not have to worry about intellectual property disclosures. But anyway, those are some things to think about: leadership, policy, culture, and partnerships. So, and that could be something that you're thinking about within the EPIC, which is we want to investigate our intellectual property policies. Most folks don't even know what is the policy. Who created the policy, and when was the last time it was changed? We got a policy for that. Well, it's somewhere in the archives that hasn't been dusted off in 2 decades. So there's these things these are ideas to think about as you're talking about enhancing capacity. What does that mean? Creating an enabling environment. All right, so those are all the questions, and then some things there. That's my email. Feel free to reach out. Definitely be back here in DC in a few weeks for any questions or comments related to intellectual property, to startups, institutional transformation, and then feel free to visit, invite me down to your campuses. All right, and it's a save the date. We'll be back here. We're actually hosting a Inclusive Innovation Forum at USPTO on the 21st. It's really going to be something which launching an intellectual property policy and understanding how does this need to be an enabling environment for culture and transformation. So save the date if you want to come back to DC. I know you've been in DC a lot already, so feel free to come back and visit us. And with there, I'll pause, and I think we're at time we have questions.
Yep, just one.
Okay.
They wanted me to place your email in the chat.
Okay, sure.
Can I interrupt you?
Yep.
Cool.
Yes.
Yeah, I saw you post a conference.
Yes.
How to register that conference?
I'm sorry?
How to register that conference?
Oh, a good question. Just VentureWell.org. I wish they put that on the slide deck, right? They should have put the, so it's VentureWell.org. It'll be one of the first things that pop up, which is our conference in March. But you can register which by clicking on the button on our website. It has all the information on the website.
I'll do the email back to this website.
Okay. All right. Mm-hmm. And please be on the lookout for Granted from NSF. That's still in the process. I think they'll talk about that tomorrow, but begin as you're talking about research enterprise, research administration capacity, that is what that particular program is looking to address, which is the infrastructure needed to have that enabling environment. All right, cool, we're good? Did we hit time? Do we have any more time left? Nope. Cool. Well, thank you all so much. I'm sure I'm between you and some kind of cocktail, so enjoy the rest of your day.